Wait. How did you know the Elysian changed ownership last week? That's not public information yet. Victoria smiled, though Rebecca couldn't see it. Isn't it? I must have heard it through my professional network. Manhattan's hospitality industry is quite small, after all. Victoria. Rebecca's tone had changed completely now. What did you do? What makes you think I did anything? Because I know you. And this feels like something you would do. Victoria considered her next words carefully. There was a certain satisfaction in letting Rebecca connect the dots herself, in watching the realization dawn that her actions had consequences. Rebecca, as much as I'd love to continue this conversation, I have another meeting starting in 5 minutes. I wish you the best of luck finding a new venue. Perhaps something less intimidating might suit you better. It was you. Rebecca's voice was flat now, the shock of understanding evident. You bought the Elysian. You bought an entire hotel just to ruin my wedding. Victoria checked her watch. That sounds rather extreme, doesn't it? Who would do something like that? You would. Rebecca's voice hardened. You absolutely would. You're exactly that petty and that powerful. Petty? Victoria repeated, the words settling uncomfortably. Is it petty to expect loyalty from someone you've supported for 15 years? Is it petty to feel hurt when you're deemed too successful, too confident, too intimidating to attend your best friend's wedding? Perhaps your definition of pettiness differs from mine. This is insane. You've lost your mind, Victoria. Rebecca was shouting now. Normal people don't buy hotels to get revenge. Normal people move on. And normal people don't discard decade-long friendships because their fiancé feels threatened by successful women, Victoria countered, her calm finally slipping. Normal people stand up for the people who've stood by them through everything. But you made your choice, Rebecca. Now I've made mine. I'm going to tell everyone about this, Rebecca threatened. Everyone will know what you did. Victoria laughed softly. Go ahead. Tell everyone that Victoria Winters, the woman you uninvited from your wedding for being too intimidating, bought an entire luxury hotel just to prove how right you were. I'm sure that will reflect wonderfully on your judgment. She ended the call before Rebecca could respond, setting her phone down carefully on her desk. The conversation had gone almost exactly as she'd anticipated, and yet the satisfaction she'd expected to feel was tempered by something else, a nagging discomfort at Rebecca's words. Was this extreme? Had she truly lost her mind in pursuit of revenge? Victoria shook off the doubt. Rebecca had made her position clear when she'd chosen to exclude Victoria from her wedding. Actions had consequences, and Rebecca was simply facing hers. Her phone buzzed with a text from Hannah Moore, her most trusted friend and confidant since their days at Columbia Business School. Drinks tonight? I heard through the grapevine that you bought a hotel. We need to discuss this level of boss behavior immediately. Victoria smiled, typing back a quick confirmation. Hannah was the one person who might understand, or at least wouldn't immediately judge, her actions. They arranged to meet at their favorite rooftop bar at 8. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of meetings and client calls. Victoria maintained her professional focus with practiced ease, compartmentalizing the morning's confrontation with Rebecca. By the time she arrived at the Skyline Lounge that evening, she had almost convinced herself that her actions were perfectly reasonable, a simple business acquisition with the side benefit of delivering some well-deserved consequences. Hannah was already at their usual corner table, 2 martinis waiting. She stood to embrace Victoria, her expression a mixture of amusement and concern. Okay, Hannah said as they sat down. Spill everything. You bought the Elysian? The whole damn hotel? One of the most prestigious venues in Manhattan? Victoria took a sip of her martini before responding. I've been looking to diversify my investment portfolio for some time. Real estate, particularly in the luxury hospitality sector, seemed like a logical next step. Hannah raised an eyebrow. Save the corporate press release for the Wall Street Journal. This is me you're talking to. I know this has something to do with Rebecca and that disaster of a friendship breakup. Victoria sighed, the facade cracking slightly. She uninvited me from her wedding, Hannah. After 15 years of friendship. After I spent 8 months helping her plan every detail. She looked me in the eye and said I was too intimidating to attend. And so naturally, the proportional response was to buy her wedding venue and shut it down 2 months before her big day. Hannah's tone was neutral, not judgmental. When you put it that way, it sounds extreme. It is extreme, Vic, gloriously, fabulously extreme. Hannah raised her glass in a toast. It's also the most Victoria Winters move I've ever witnessed, and I've known you for 12 years. Victoria clinked her glass against Hannah's, a small smile forming. She called me this morning. Apparently, they can't find another suitable venue on such short notice. Shocking, Hannah deadpanned. Who could have predicted that? She figured out it was me. Said I was petty and had lost my mind. Hannah set down her glass, studying Victoria's face. And how do you feel about that assessment? Victoria considered the question seriously. Part of me knows this was an overreaction. That I could have just accepted the rejection and moved on like a normal person, as Rebecca put it. But another part of me is tired of being punished for my success. Of being made to feel like I should apologize for the life I've built. Victoria's voice hardened. Rebecca didn't just uninvite me from her wedding. She made me feel like there was something wrong with me for being ambitious, for being accomplished. Like I should make myself smaller to accommodate Jason's insecurity. Hannah nodded, understanding in her eyes. So this isn't just about a wedding invitation. No. It's about refusing to apologize for who I am. Victoria took another sip of her martini. Though I will admit, buying an entire hotel might have been a bit much. Hannah laughed. Just a bit. But you know what? Sometimes a bit much is exactly what's needed. Sometimes you have to be extreme to make people realize they can't treat you like an afterthought. Rebecca thinks I've lost my mind. Rebecca thinks any woman who prioritizes her career over finding a husband has lost her mind, Hannah pointed out. Her opinion on mental health isn't exactly progressive. Victoria smiled, feeling some of the tension ease from her shoulders. Hannah had always had that effect, the ability to validate Victoria's feelings while gently calling her out when needed. So what happens now? Hannah asked. You own a luxury hotel. That's a significant responsibility, not to mention a massive financial investment. Was this just about revenge, or do you actually have a plan? The question caught Victoria off guard. In the whirlwind of executing her revenge, she hadn't fully considered the long-term implications of her new acquisition. She owned a hotel now, a prestigious, profitable establishment with hundreds of employees depending on it for their livelihoods. I haven't thought that far ahead, Victoria admitted. The purchase was impulsive, I'll grant you that. Hannah leaned forward. Then maybe it's time to start thinking beyond the revenge. You're Victoria Winters. You don't just react to situations, you transform them into opportunities. So how are you going to transform this one? The question lingered as they finished their drinks and ordered a second round. Hannah was right. Victoria had built her reputation and her business on finding creative solutions, on turning challenges into advantages. She couldn't allow this situation to be any different. By the time they parted ways 3 hours later, the initial outline of a plan had begun to form in Victoria's mind. It would require significant work and an entirely new direction for her business, but the potential was undeniably exciting. The following morning, Victoria arrived at the Elysian Hotel before 7, requesting a meeting with Anthony Pierce and his management team. They gathered in the hotel's executive boardroom, confusion and apprehension evident on their faces. Thank you all for meeting on such short notice, Victoria began, standing at the head of the table. I realize my initial directive regarding the January wedding cancellations may have seemed arbitrary and potentially damaging to the hotel's reputation. Anthony Pierce nodded cautiously. We've received significant backlash from Ms. Chen and her clients. They've threatened legal action. Though our contracts do include provisions for ownership changes and renovation necessities. I understand, Victoria acknowledged. And I appreciate your team's professionalism in handling a difficult situation. Today, I'd like to share my actual vision for the Elysian moving forward, a vision that extends far beyond a simple renovation. She opened her laptop and connected it to the room's projection system. A sleek presentation appeared on the screen, displaying a completely reimagined business model for the hotel. The Elysian has long been known as one of Manhattan's premier wedding venues, Victoria continued. But I believe its potential extends far beyond that limited scope. What I'm proposing is a transformation, not just of the physical space, but of the hotel's entire identity and purpose. Ms. Winters, the team from Goldman Sachs is here for the presentation. Victoria nodded, setting aside her tablet and straightening her already immaculate desk. Send them in. The meeting represented a potential watershed moment for her new venture. Goldman Sachs was considering the Elysian for its annual executive retreat, a prestigious event that would set the standard for the hotel's new direction. If she could secure this contract, others would follow. As the executives filed in, Victoria greeted each with the perfect balance of warmth and professionalism that had become her trademark. The presentation she had prepared showcased not just the Elysian's planned physical transformation, but a completely reimagined approach to corporate gatherings, one that emphasized meaningful connection, strategic thinking, and luxury without ostentation. What we're creating isn't just another hotel with meeting rooms, Victoria explained as she guided them through virtual renderings of the space. It's an environment specifically designed to foster the kind of thinking and collaboration that can't happen in traditional office settings. Every element, from the lighting to the acoustics to the transitional spaces between formal meetings, has been engineered to enhance productivity while providing the comfort and exclusivity your team deserves. The Goldman Sachs team was visibly impressed, asking insightful questions and engaging deeply with the concept. By the time they left 2 hours later, Victoria had secured not just a verbal commitment for their retreat, but introductions to 3 other Fortune 100 companies looking for similar experiences. As her assistant showed the executives out, Victoria allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph. The path that had begun with hurt and anger was evolving into something genuinely exciting, a new direction for her career that played to her strengths and filled a real market need. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call, a number she didn't recognize. Normally, Victoria let unknown calls go to voicemail, but something prompted her to answer. Victoria Winters. Ms. Winters, this is Jason Chen. Victoria froze. In all the drama with Rebecca, she had never actually spoken directly with Jason, the man who had deemed her too intimidating to attend his wedding. Mr. Chen, she replied, her voice neutral. This is unexpected. I'm sure it is. His tone was clipped, professional. I've been trying to reach you through proper channels at the Elysian for weeks without success. Eventually, I had to resort to calling your company directly. How resourceful of you. Victoria kept her tone pleasant. What can I do for you? I think you know exactly why I'm calling. The control in his voice slipped slightly. Our wedding venue. The one you purchased apparently for the sole purpose of sabotaging our plans. Victoria leaned back in her chair. That's a rather dramatic interpretation of a standard business acquisition, Mr. Chen. Please, he scoffed. Let's not insult each other's intelligence. Rebecca told me about your conversation. We both know exactly what you did and why. And yet the New York Times seems to think I made a brilliant strategic move into an underserved market, Victoria countered. Sometimes, motivations can be multifaceted. She heard Jason take a deep breath, as if steadying himself. Look, Ms. Winters, I didn't call to trade barbs or accusations. I called to try to resolve this situation like adults. I'm listening. Our wedding is 6 weeks away. We've lost our venue, and despite Margot's best efforts, we haven't been able to find a suitable alternative. Every comparable venue in the city is booked through spring. His voice tightened. I'm asking, professionally, if you would consider allowing us to proceed with our original plans at the Elysian. We're willing to pay a premium rate. Victoria considered his request, noting with interest that he had called without Rebecca's knowledge or presence. That's an interesting proposition, Mr. Chen. But I'm afraid the Elysian is already in the early stages of its transformation. The grand ballroom where your wedding was to be held is scheduled for demolition beginning January 2nd. Demolition can be delayed, Jason pressed. Construction schedules are flexible. I'm in real estate development myself, I understand how these things work. I'm sure you do, Victoria replied. But my decision isn't about construction timelines. It's about the direction of my business. Jason was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its professional veneer. What do you want, Victoria? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry we didn't include you in the wedding. I'm sorry if that hurt you. But this response it's disproportionate. It's excessive. Victoria felt a flash of anger at his dismissive tone. Is it excessive, Mr. Chen? Or is it simply a consequence you weren't prepared for? You and Rebecca decided I was too intimidating, too successful, too much for your perfect day. You made me feel that I should apologize for the life I've built. And now you're uncomfortable with the full extent of what that life allows me to do. This isn't about your success, Jason argued. It was never about that. It was about what? Victoria interrupted. About your comfort? Your insecurities? Please, enlighten me about why my presence would have been so detrimental to your wedding day. The silence that followed was telling. Finally, Jason sighed. I don't think this conversation is productive. On the contrary, I find it illuminating, Victoria replied. You're willing to call and negotiate when you need something from me, but you can't honestly address why you excluded me in the first place. Rebecca has been devastated by this, Jason said, changing tactics. She's lost weight, she's not sleeping. This was supposed to be the happiest time of her life, and instead, she's watching her dream wedding fall apart. Whatever issue you have with me, is it worth destroying her happiness? Victoria felt a twinge of something, not quite guilt, but a recognition of the collateral damage her actions had caused. Rebecca had hurt her deeply, yes, but had Victoria's response gone too far? Mr. Chen, I appreciate your call, but my decision regarding the Elysian is final. The hotel is embarking on a new direction that unfortunately doesn't include wedding venues. She kept her voice firm but not unkind. I wish you and Rebecca all the happiness in your marriage, whenever and wherever it takes place. After ending the call, Victoria sat motionless, processing the conversation. Jason's attempt to negotiate had been unexpected, as had the hint of desperation in his voice. For weeks, Victoria had been focused on her triumph, on transforming her revenge into business success. She hadn't allowed herself to consider the genuine pain her actions might have caused. Was Rebecca truly devastated? And if so, did Victoria care? The question lingered as she gathered her materials for her next meeting. She had built her reputation on being formidable, on never backing down, on transforming obstacles into opportunities. The Elysian project was already being hailed as her most innovative move yet. Publications were requesting interviews, competitors were scrambling to analyze her strategy, and potential clients were lining up for the reimagined space. All of the success had grown from the seeds of rejection and hurt. Was she willing to compromise it now because Jason Chen had finally shown a crack in his arrogance? By the time Victoria left her office that evening, she had pushed the conversation with Jason to the back of her mind. Her focus needed to remain on the future of the Elysian and her expanding business, not on the drama that had initiated the acquisition. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to Victoria's penthouse. She had just finished her yoga practice and was enjoying her first cup of coffee when the doorman called up. "Ms. Winters, there's a Ms. Rebecca Williams here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's insisting it's urgent." Victoria paused, coffee cup midway to her lips. After Jason's call yesterday, she should have anticipated this, but somehow the idea of Rebecca appearing at her door still caught her off guard. Send her up, Victoria decided after a moment's consideration. Better to face this confrontation directly than allow it to fester. 5 minutes later, a knock sounded at her door. Victoria opened it to find Rebecca standing in the hallway, looking like a shadow of her former self. Jason hadn't exaggerated, she had lost weight, and dark circles underscored her eyes. She clutched her handbag like a shield, much as she had during their last encounter in this very apartment. "Rebecca," Victoria greeted her, stepping aside. "Come in." Rebecca entered hesitantly, her eyes darting around the familiar space as if seeing it for the first time. "I didn't think you'd agree to see me." "I considered declining," Victoria admitted, leading the way to the living room. "But that seemed cowardly." "Coffee?" Rebecca shook her head, perching on the edge of the sofa, the same spot she'd occupied when she delivered the news about the wedding. "Jason doesn't know I'm here. He told me about his call to you yesterday." Victoria took a seat across from her, noting the irony of their positions, a mirror image of their last encounter. "And you decided a personal appeal might be more effective?" "No." Rebecca's voice was quiet but steady. "I came to apologize." Of all the scenarios Victoria had imagined, this wasn't one of them. She remained silent, waiting. Rebecca continued, her gaze finally meeting Victoria's. For the next hour, Victoria outlined her plan, transforming the Elysian into the city's first luxury hotel specifically designed to host corporate retreats, product launches, and executive conferences. The redesign would feature state-of-the-art meeting facilities, private workspaces, and accommodations tailored to business travelers and corporate clients. "The wedding market is saturated," Victoria explained. "Every luxury hotel in Manhattan competes for the same limited pool of events. But the corporate retreat market is underserved, particularly at the high end. Companies are increasingly willing to invest in meaningful gathering experiences for their teams, especially post-pandemic. The Elysian can become the destination of choice for Fortune 500 companies looking to combine luxury with productivity." As she spoke, Victoria could see the skepticism on her team's faces gradually transform into interest, even excitement. By the time she concluded her presentation, Anthony Pierce was nodding thoughtfully. "It's an ambitious pivot," he admitted. "But I can see the potential. Our location and existing amenities would transition well to this new model." "Exactly," Victoria agreed. "And while this means we will indeed be canceling all wedding bookings for the coming year to accommodate the renovation and rebranding, it's not a capricious decision. It's a strategic business move with long-term benefits for the hotel and its staff." The meeting continued for another hour as they discussed implementation details, staffing implications, and timeline considerations. When it concluded, Victoria felt a renewed sense of purpose. What had begun as an impulsive act of revenge was evolving into something more meaningful, a genuine business opportunity that could potentially redefine luxury corporate hospitality in Manhattan. As she was gathering her materials to leave, Anthony approached her privately. "Ms. Winters, I hope you'll forgive my candor, but I feel I should share something with you." Victoria nodded, encouraging him to continue. When you first instructed us to cancel the January weddings, particularly the Chen Williams event, I was concerned. It seemed potentially personal rather than business-driven. Victoria maintained a neutral expression. What changed your perspective? Today's presentation, he replied simply. What you've outlined isn't just a viable business strategy, it's genuinely innovative. The Elysian has been successful as a wedding venue, but you're right that we're one of dozens competing for the same market. Your corporate retreat concept could position us uniquely in the industry. Victoria smiled, appreciating his honesty. Thank you, Anthony. I value your insight and experience. And yes, initially the decision may have had multiple motivations. But I believe in transforming challenges into opportunities. This is an opportunity for the Elysian to become something even more exceptional. After leaving the hotel, Victoria found herself walking through Central Park, taking a rare moment to reflect. The crisp November air carried the scent of fallen leaves and approaching winter. In less than 2 months, Rebecca and Jason would have been celebrating their winter wonderland wedding at the Elysian, a celebration Victoria had helped design but would never have attended. Now, that wedding would take place elsewhere, if it happened at all. And the Elysian would begin its transformation into something entirely new, something that reflected Victoria's vision rather than her hurt. Her phone buzzed with a text. From her assistant, news of the Elysian's rebranding has leaked. 3 major business publications requesting interviews about your innovative pivot into corporate hospitality. How do you want to proceed? Victoria smiled. Of course, word had spread quickly. Manhattan's hospitality industry thrived on insider information and strategic moves. Her impulsive revenge purchase was already being reframed as a brilliant business strategy, which, she had to admit, it was rapidly becoming. She texted back, schedule the interviews for next week. And draft a press release about Victoria Winter's events expanding into corporate retreat planning and management in conjunction with our acquisition of the Elysian. As she continued walking, Victoria realized that something fundamental had shifted within her. The hurt and anger that had driven her initial decision to buy the Elysian hadn't disappeared entirely, but they had been channeled into something constructive, a new direction for her business, a fresh challenge for her creativity and leadership. Rebecca had deemed Victoria too intimidating because of her success. Rather than diminishing herself to make others comfortable, Victoria had chosen to lean into that success, to amplify it in a way that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. Her phone rang, Rebecca again. Victoria hesitated, then declined the call. Whatever Rebecca wanted to say, whether it was more accusations or desperate pleas for help finding a new venue, Victoria wasn't interested in hearing it. She had moved beyond the need for confrontation or justification. Instead, she called Hannah. I've decided to transform the Elysian into a corporate retreat destination, she announced when her friend answered. Complete rebranding, renovation, new business model, the works. Hannah laughed. Of course you have. Taking revenge wasn't enough, you had to turn it into a business opportunity too. That's why you're Victoria Winters. Is it crazy? Victoria asked, surprising herself with the hint of vulnerability in her question. Completely crazy, Hannah confirmed. And absolutely brilliant. That's your superpower, Vic. You don't just survive challenges, you alchemize them into gold. Most people would have cried into their wine and moved on after what Rebecca did. You bought a hotel and created a new business vertical. Victoria laughed, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. When you put it that way, I sound a little unhinged. The line between unhinged and visionary is often just success, Hannah replied. If this works, you'll be a genius. If it fails, you'll be the crazy woman who bought a hotel for revenge. Then I better make sure it works, Victoria said, her determination returning. As she ended the call and continued her walk, Victoria found herself thinking about Rebecca's words from their confrontation. Normal people don't buy hotels to get revenge. Normal people move on. Perhaps Rebecca was right. Normal people did move on. But Victoria had never aspired to normalcy. She had built her life and her business on exceeding expectations, on transforming obstacles into stepping stones. Why should this situation be any different? Rebecca and Jason had tried to make Victoria feel that her success was something to apologize for, something to hide or diminish. Instead, she had amplified it in the most dramatic way possible, not just to spite them, but to remind herself of who she truly was. Victoria Winters didn't shrink to make others comfortable. She expanded until they had no choice but to acknowledge her presence, her power, her worth. As the winter sun cast long shadows across the park path, Victoria smiled to herself. She had bought a hotel to close a wedding venue out of spite. But in doing so, she may have opened the door to the next chapter of her success story. Sometimes, the most unexpected beginnings led to the most extraordinary destinations. The headlines appeared 3 weeks later, splashed across the business section of the New York Times. Event planning mogul Victoria Winters revolutionizes corporate retreats with the Elysian acquisition. The article detailed Victoria's visionary pivot into the luxury corporate hospitality space, complete with architectural renderings of the Elysian's planned transformation and quotes from industry experts hailing the move as brilliant and ahead of the curve. Victoria sipped her morning coffee as she read the digital edition on her tablet, a small smile playing at her lips. The reporter had done an excellent job capturing the business strategy without a single mention of weddings, cancellations, or personal vendettas. The story presented Victoria exactly as she wanted to be seen, as a shrewd businesswoman identifying an underserved market, not as a jilted friend exacting elaborate revenge. Her phone chimed with a text from Hannah, front page of the business section. "You've officially transformed petty revenge into corporate genius. I'm in awe." Victoria laughed, typing back, "The line between the two is thinner than most people realize." December had arrived with a dusting of snow and the frenetic energy of holiday preparations. The Elysian's transformation was progressing at remarkable speed. Victoria had assembled a world-class team of designers, architects, and hospitality consultants, all working under her exacting vision. The hotel remained open during the initial planning phase, though all wedding bookings had been cancelled and refunded with the promised 20% inconvenience fee. All except one. Victoria had instructed Anthony to reach out personally to every affected couple except Rebecca and Jason. Their cancellation notification had been delivered via a standard form letter, their refund processed without the additional compensation, and their subsequent calls and emails directed to an automated response system that never quite connected them to a real person. It was petty, Victoria acknowledged to herself. But there was a certain satisfaction in knowing that while other couples received personalized apologies and generous compensation, Rebecca and Jason were experiencing the same dismissive treatment they had shown her. Victoria's assistant knocked lightly on her office door, interrupting her thoughts. "What I did, uninviting you from the wedding, dismissing our friendship, it was cruel and cowardly. I let Jason's insecurities dictate my actions, and I hurt someone who has always been there for me." Victoria kept her expression neutral. "That's a rather dramatic change of perspective since our last conversation." "Losing the Elysian forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths," Rebecca admitted. "At first, I was just angry and shocked. I couldn't believe you would go to such extremes. But then I started thinking about what it said about me, that my best friend felt the need to buy an entire hotel just to make me understand how deeply I'd hurt her." She twisted her engagement ring nervously. "I've spent the last few weeks reevaluating a lot of things, my relationship with Jason, my priorities, the kind of person I want to be. And I realized that I've been allowing myself to become smaller, less authentic, to accommodate Jason's vision of our life together." Victoria's coffee had grown cold, forgotten in her hand. "And this realization led you to my door because I owe you an apology," Rebecca said simply. "Not because I want something from you, not because I'm hoping you'll magically restore our wedding venue, but because you deserve to hear me acknowledge how wrong I was." The sincerity in Rebecca's voice was unmistakable. Victoria set down her cup, studying the woman she had once considered her closest friend. "I appreciate the apology, Rebecca. Truly. But I'm not sure what you're hoping to accomplish here. Some wounds don't heal just because they're acknowledged." Rebecca nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I know. I don't expect you to forgive me or to suddenly reinstate our friendship. I needed you to know that I understand what I did, and I'm genuinely sorry for it." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small wrapped package, setting it on the coffee table between them. "This is for you. Not a peace offering, I know we're beyond that, but something I should have given you a long time ago." Victoria made no move to take it. "What is it?" "Open it when I'm gone," Rebecca suggested, standing. "I've taken enough of your time." She moved toward the door, then paused, turning back to Victoria. "For what it's worth, I've seen the articles about your plans for the Elysian. It's brilliant, exactly the kind of innovative thinking that's always set you apart. Jason was intimidated by that brilliance, and I was weak enough to let his insecurity dictate my actions. That's on me, not you." Victoria found herself rising, following Rebecca to the door. "What about your wedding?" Rebecca's smile was sad but resolute. "We're postponing indefinitely, actually. I told Jason I needed time to reevaluate what I really want, in the wedding and in our relationship. Your extreme response to being excluded made me realize that I've been excluding myself from my own life, letting other people's expectations shape my choices." She opened the door, then turned to face Victoria one last time. "You've never apologized For your success, for your strength, for taking up space in the world. I used to admire that about you before I started resenting it. Thank you for the reminder of what it looks like to refuse to make yourself smaller for someone else's comfort." With that, she was gone, the soft click of the door the only evidence she had been there at all, that and the small wrapped package sitting on Victoria's coffee table. Victoria returned to the living room slowly, her mind processing the unexpected encounter. Rebecca's apology had seemed genuine, her self-reflection authentic. It was not the confrontation Victoria had anticipated, nor the desperate plea for help she might have expected. She picked up the package, weighing it in her hand before carefully unwrapping it. Inside was a small velvet box. Opening it, Victoria found a silver charm bracelet, a replica of one she had admired in a boutique window when she and Rebecca were still in college, long before either of them could afford such luxuries. "Someday," Victoria had said as they pressed their noses against the glass, "when we're successful and running the world, we'll come back and buy matching ones." Rebecca had remembered that moment all these years later. Had purchased this bracelet not as a bribe or manipulation, but as an acknowledgement of a shared history, a connection that had once meant everything to both of them. Attached to the box was a small note in Rebecca's handwriting: "You kept your promise, you became successful and started running the world. I'm sorry I couldn't keep up without becoming threatened by your light. Wear this and remember that your refusal to dim your shine inspired at least one person to reconsider dimming her own." Victoria closed the box, setting it back on the table. The gesture was unexpected, touching in its simplicity and the memory it evoked. But did it change anything? Did it erase the hurt, the betrayal, the weeks of planning her elaborate revenge? She wasn't sure. What she did know was that something had shifted within her. The cold satisfaction she had felt when executing her plan, when watching her revenge transform into business success, it had been replaced by something more complex. Not regret, exactly, but a recognition that triumph felt hollow when built solely on someone else's pain. Her phone rang. Anthony Pierce from the Elysian. "Ms. Winters, I wanted to update you on our progress. The architectural team has finalized the plans for the East Wing renovation, and we've secured all the necessary permits. Construction can begin as scheduled on January 2nd. "Excellent," Victoria replied, her business instincts automatically engaging. "And the response to our corporate retreat concept?" "Phenomenal," Anthony reported. "We've received inquiries from 27 Fortune 500 companies since the Times article. The Goldman Sachs contract alone has generated enormous interest. It seems you identified a market need that no one else had recognized." Victoria smiled, genuine pride washing through her. "Thank you, Anthony. Your team has done exceptional work implementing this vision on such an accelerated timeline." After ending the call, Victoria walked to her windows, looking out at the winter afternoon. The sky was clear, the city gleaming under a fresh dusting of snow. Below, people hurried along the sidewalks, wrapped in scarves and coats, intent on their own dramas, their own triumphs and setbacks. Rebecca's visit had unsettled her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Not because it made her question her actions. Victoria had long since justified her extreme response as both personally satisfying and professionally strategic. But because it forced her to confront the reality that even in victory, there were costs. Even in transformation, there was loss. She had purchased the Elysian to prove a point, to demonstrate the full extent of her power to someone who had underestimated and dismissed her. That mission had been accomplished, spectacularly so. But in the process, she had also created something meaningful, something that extended beyond the personal vendetta that had initiated it. The Elysian's transformation wasn't just about closing a wedding venue to spite an ex-friend. It had evolved into a genuine innovation, a reimagining of corporate hospitality that was already being hailed as visionary. The revenge had become the catalyst for what might be Victoria's most significant professional achievement yet. As she turned away from the window, her gaze fell on the small velvet box containing the charm bracelet. The gift represented a chapter of her life now closed, a friendship that had defined her 20s and early 30s, a connection that had once seemed unbreakable. Victoria picked up the box again, opening it to study the delicate silver charms. Then, decisively, she fastened the bracelet around her wrist. Not as a symbol of forgiveness or reconciliation, but as a reminder of her own journey, of the promise she had made to herself all those years ago to become successful on her own terms, to never apologize for her ambition or her achievements. Rebecca had given her this gift as an acknowledgement of that promise kept. And in wearing it, Victoria acknowledged something in return, that the true power of success wasn't in using it to punish those who underestimated you, but in using it to create something meaningful that outlasted the hurt that might have inspired it. Her phone chimed with a reminder for her next meeting, a design consultation for the Elysian's new executive conference center. Victoria gathered her materials. slipping on her coat and gloves. As she left her apartment, the silver bracelet caught the light, glinting beneath her sleeve, a small reminder of where she had begun and how far she had come. The story that had started with rejection and revenge was transforming once again. This time into something more nuanced, more lasting. Victoria had bought a hotel to close a wedding venue out of spite. But in doing so, she had opened the door to the next evolution of her success, one built not on retribution, but on vision. As the elevator doors closed, Victoria smiled to herself. Sometimes the most powerful response to being underestimated wasn't proving others wrong, but proving yourself right. 6 months later, Victoria stood at the edge of the Elysian's rooftop terrace, watching as Manhattan's lights began to twinkle in the early summer twilight. Behind her, the newly renovated space hummed with activity as staff made final preparations for the grand reopening gala scheduled to begin in 1 hour. The transformation was complete. The Elysian had been reborn as the apex, Manhattan's premier corporate retreat and executive conference destination. I must say, when you set your mind to something, you certainly don't waste time. Our lawyers are still in shock at how quickly you've expedited this process. Victoria smiled. When I see an opportunity, I don't believe in hesitation. They moved to a private conference room where the final documents awaited. As Victoria reviewed each page with her attorney, Maxwell studied her with undisguised curiosity. I have to ask, he said finally. What are your plans for the Elysian? Will you maintain its current operations, or do you have a new vision in mind? Victoria signed the last document before answering. I believe in honoring traditions that work, Max. The Elysian has a stellar reputation for good reason. She handed the papers to her lawyer. But I do anticipate making some selective changes to the booking and events policies. Maxwell nodded, clearly still puzzled by her motives but professional enough not to press further. Well, I'm sure. Whatever direction you take will be successful. You've never been one to make poor business decisions. If only he knew, Victoria thought, that this particular decision had nothing to do with business and everything to do with something far more personal. After the paperwork was complete and hands were shaken, Victoria was officially the new owner of the Elysian Hotel. She requested a private meeting with the general manager, Anthony Pierce, a distinguished man in his 50s who had run the hotel for the past decade. Mr. Pierce, Victoria began once they were alone, I want to assure you that I have no intention of disrupting the excellent operation you've built here. Your staff and leadership will remain in place. Relief visibly washed over the man's face. Thank you, Ms. Winters. That's very reassuring to hear. The Elysian team is like family. I completely understand the importance of loyalty, Victoria said, her voice carrying a weight the manager couldn't possibly comprehend. However, there is one immediate change I'd like to implement regarding upcoming events. She opened her laptop and pulled up a specific date. I see we have a wedding scheduled for January 10th. The Chen Williams party. Anthony nodded. Yes, that's one of our premier winter weddings this season. The wedding planner, Margot Chen, is quite renowned. She's working with the bride, Rebecca Williams, and her fiancé, Jason Chen. I'm familiar with the couple, Victoria said, her voice neutral. I'm afraid we'll need to cancel that event. Anthony's professional composure slipped for just a moment. Cancel? But Ms. Winters, that date is only 2 months away. The deposits have been paid, the arrangements are well underway. It would be highly unusual to cancel at this stage without significant cause. I understand it's unconventional, Victoria acknowledged. But as the new owner, I'm implementing a policy change that affects this particular date. The hotel will be closed for renovations beginning January 5th and continuing through the end of the month. Renovations? Anthony looked genuinely confused. But the property underwent extensive updates just 18 months ago. Yes, but I have a very specific vision for enhancing certain features, Victoria maintained her businesslike demeanor. Please inform Ms. Chen immediately that the venue is no longer available for January 10th. Of course, the hotel will refund all deposits in full, plus an additional 20% to compensate for the inconvenience. Anthony appeared to be struggling between his professional instinct to accommodate his new employer and his clear discomfort with the directive. Ms. Winters, with all due respect, canceling a wedding at this stage could significantly damage the Elysian's reputation for reliability. Perhaps we could delay the renovations until after the decision is final, Mr. Pierce. Victoria's tone remained pleasant but carried an unmistakable note of authority. I'm sure you'll handle the communication with appropriate sensitivity. If there's any backlash, you can direct it entirely to me as the owner. Your team bears no responsibility for this decision. She closed her laptop with a definitive click. I look forward to working with you and your exceptional staff moving forward. Other than this one adjustment, I anticipate a very smooth transition. After leaving the meeting, Victoria felt a strange mixture of emotions. The rational part of her recognized the extravagance, some might say madness, of what she had just done. She had spent a fortune buying a hotel for the sole purpose of canceling one wedding. It was the kind of revenge plot that belonged in a movie, not real life. And yet, as she walked through the elegant lobby of her new acquisition, a sense of grim satisfaction settled over her. Rebecca and Jason had deemed her presence too intimidating for their perfect day. They had discarded years of friendship and loyalty because Victoria's success made them uncomfortable. Now they would learn what happened when they underestimated exactly how far that success could reach. Victoria stepped out into the crisp November air, her phone already buzzing with new messages. Her assistant had scheduled back-to-back meetings. For the remainder of the day, real clients with real events that would proceed exactly as planned. She would continue building her empire, continue being the intimidating success that had so threatened Jason's ego. And somewhere across town, Rebecca and Jason were about to receive news that would throw their perfect wedding plans into complete disarray. The thought brought a small smile to Victoria's face as she slid into the waiting car. Some might call it petty. Victoria preferred to think of it as poetic justice. After all, if she wasn't good enough to attend their wedding, then they weren't good enough to use her hotel. The call came at 10:17 a.m., exactly 4 days after Victoria had instructed Anthony Pierce to cancel Rebecca and Jason's wedding. Victoria was in the middle of a client presentation when her assistant slipped her a note. Rebecca Williams calling. Third attempt today. Says it's urgent. Victoria finished her presentation without missing a beat, secured the contract with a handshake, and waited until she was alone in her office before returning the call. She took a deep breath, straightening her posture as though preparing for battle, though Rebecca couldn't possibly see her through the phone. Rebecca, Victoria answered, her voice professionally pleasant. What can I do for you? The sound that came through the line was something between a sob and a scream. What did you do? How could you do this to us? Victoria leaned back in her chair, gazing out at the Manhattan skyline. I'm afraid you'll need to be more specific. The Elysian. Rebecca's voice cracked with emotion. Our wedding venue. They called yesterday to say the hotel is suddenly closing for renovations. And our wedding is cancelled. In January. 2 months from now. Do you have any idea what this means? I imagine it's quite inconvenient, Victoria replied, her tone remaining measured. January is peak wedding season. Finding another venue will be challenging. Challenging? It's impossible. Margot has called every suitable venue in Manhattan. Everything is booked. We'll have to postpone the entire wedding or get married in some second-rate location that doesn't match anything we've planned. Victoria allowed a brief silence before responding. That sounds frustrating. Perhaps you should speak with the hotel management about this issue? I did. We did. Jason and I went there in person this morning and spoke to the manager. He was apologetic but said the decision came directly from the new owner who is implementing immediate renovations. Another pause. The new owner? Yes. Some heartless business person who apparently bought the hotel last week and is already making ridiculous changes. The manager wouldn't even give us a name, just said all communication had to go through proper channels. Rebecca's breath hitched. Vic, I need your help. You know everyone in the event world. You must have connections, alternatives, something we can do. The irony was almost too perfect. Rebecca, who had deemed Victoria too intimidating to attend her wedding, was now desperately seeking her help to save that very same wedding. Victoria savored the moment briefly before responding. I'm afraid my schedule is completely full, Rebecca. As I mentioned when you called last week, I'm in the middle of a significant business acquisition. Victoria examined her freshly manicured nails. Besides, didn't you hire Margot Chen specifically because she specializes in weddings? I'm sure she has contingency plans for situations like this. She doesn't. Rebecca wailed. This doesn't happen. Venues don't cancel 8 weeks before a wedding without warning. It's unheard of. Victoria stood and walked to her window, looking down at the city streets below. Well, perhaps this is an opportunity for growth. Dealing with unexpected challenges, adapting to changing circumstances, these are valuable life skills. Are you serious right now? Rebecca's voice had shifted from desperate to angry. This is my wedding day we're talking about. The most important day of my life. And you're giving me a lecture about growth opportunities? I'm simply trying to find the silver lining in an unfortunate situation, Victoria replied. After all, it's just a venue. The important thing is that you're marrying the person you love, isn't it? The one you prioritized over 15 years of friendship? The silence that followed was heavy with realization. When Rebecca spoke again, her voice was quieter, suspicious. In a luxurious Manhattan penthouse, a 34-year-old woman was about to discover the true meaning of betrayal. What began as innocent social media scrolling turned into a devastating revelation when she came face to face with her closest friends. Ultimate act of disloyalty. Victoria Winters wasn't your typical corporate executive. For years, she had been the loyal confidant, the midnight emergency call, and the shoulder that had absorbed countless tears during her best friend's romantic disasters. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. When her so-called best friend excluded her from the wedding guest list, calling her too intimidating for the perfect day, she had no idea she was walking into a battle that would redefine friendship, loyalty, and the true cost of revenge. Victoria made a silent promise that would lead to consequences no one could have anticipated. What began as heartbreak would transform into a calculated revenge plan that would shake Manhattan's elite social circles to their core. Before we dive deeper into this story, tell us where you're watching from. And if this tale of betrayal and revenge resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something truly special for your feed. The invitation mock-up looked stunning on her iPad screen. Victoria Winters adjusted the font size one last time, her fingers moving with the precision she'd developed over 15 years in corporate event planning. The color palette, silver and midnight blue, perfectly complemented the winter wonderland theme Rebecca had always dreamed about since their college days. Perfect, Victoria whispered to herself as she saved the final design. After coordinating events for Fortune 500 companies and celebrities, designing her best friend's wedding materials felt like a labor of love rather than work. Rebecca is going to absolutely love these. Her penthouse apartment overlooked Central Park, the early October leaves beginning their transformation into brilliant reds and golds. Victoria had purchased the place 3 years ago after landing the biggest client of her career, a milestone she'd celebrated with Rebecca over champagne on this very balcony. The wedding planning binder sat beside her laptop, meticulously organized with fabric swatches, venue photographs, and catering options. For the past 8 months, Victoria had devoted every spare moment to helping Rebecca plan what they jokingly called the wedding of the millennium. She'd accompanied Rebecca to countless dress fittings, negotiated with vendors, and even helped interview potential photographers. Just need Rebecca's final approval on the guest list and we can send these to the printer tomorrow, Victoria murmured, checking her watch. Rebecca would be arriving any minute for their weekly wedding planning session. The doorbell's melodic chime interrupted her thoughts. Victoria smiled, setting down her iPad and smoothing her cashmere sweater before walking to the door. Through the peephole, she saw Rebecca's familiar face, but something seemed off. Her normally effusive friend looked tense, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Becca, come in." Victoria swung the door open wide. "I've just finished the invitation design and it's absolutely perfect." "Wait until you see, Vic, we need to talk," Rebecca cut her off, her voice carrying an unfamiliar edge. She clutched her designer handbag like a shield against her chest, remaining near the doorway instead of making her usual beeline for the kitchen to pour herself a glass of wine. "Okay." Victoria's excitement dimmed. "Is everything all right with Jason? The venue didn't fall through, did they?" "No, nothing like that." Rebecca finally moved into the apartment but remained standing. "It's about the wedding planning." Victoria gestured toward the living room. "Let's sit down. I've got all the materials ready for review." Rebecca followed reluctantly, perching on the edge of the sofa rather than settling into it. Victoria sat across from her, increasingly concerned by her friend's unusual behavior. "So what's going on? You look like you're about to tell me the wedding's cancelled." Victoria attempted a joke that fell flat in the tense atmosphere. Rebecca took a deep breath. "Jason and I have been talking, and we've decided to go in a different direction with the wedding." "Different direction?" Victoria repeated, confused. "You mean like changing the theme?" "Because we can absolutely pivot if Winter Wonderland isn't working anymore. I've got some backup concepts." "No, not the theme," Rebecca interrupted, her voice suddenly firm. "The planning. The whole approach. We've hired a professional wedding planner." The words hung between them. Victoria stared at her friend, trying to process what she was hearing. "But I am a professional event planner. That's literally my career." "A wedding planner, Vic. Someone who specializes in weddings specifically." Rebecca wouldn't meet her eyes. "Margot Chen. She's done all the Astor family weddings and that big celebrity wedding at the plaza last year." Victoria felt as though the floor had suddenly tilted beneath her. "I see. And when did you make this decision?" "Last week." Rebecca had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Jason thought it would be better this way. He was worried you're too busy with your corporate clients." "Too busy?" Rebecca, I've made your wedding my priority for 8 months. I've rescheduled client meetings to accommodate dress fittings. I've spent hundreds of hours researching venues and vendors. Victoria's voice remained controlled, but a cold feeling was spreading through her chest. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I know, and I appreciate everything you've done, but what? Rebecca sighed. Jason thinks it's creating an awkward dynamic. That you're taking over too much of the wedding. Taking over? Victoria echoed, disbelief coloring her tone. I've asked for your approval on every single decision. I've created exactly what you said you wanted. That's just it. It's becoming more your vision than ours. Rebecca finally looked up, a new hardness in her expression. And there's something else. Victoria waited, a sense of foreboding growing. We're revising the guest list. Okay, Victoria said slowly. That's normal in the planning process. Are we cutting it down from 150? Yes. And? Rebecca hesitated, then the words came out in a rush. We think it would be better if you weren't a bridesmaid. Or at the wedding at all. The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria stared at her friend of 15 years, unable to process what she'd just heard. You're uninviting me? From your wedding? The words felt foreign in her mouth. Rebecca stood up, retrieving something from her handbag. She placed a check on the coffee table between them. This is to reimburse you for any expenses you've incurred. Margot will be collecting all the planning materials. Victoria didn't look at the check. Why? It's complicated. No, it's not. We've been best friends since freshman year of college. I've helped you through every breakup, job crisis, and family drama. I've spent 8 months planning your dream wedding. Tell me why I'm suddenly persona non grata. Rebecca's facade finally cracked. Jason thinks you're too intimidating. There. Are you happy? He says you make him uncomfortable with your success and your perfectionism. He thinks you're always judging him, judging us. He says you'll overshadow me on my wedding day with your whole Victoria Winters thing. My thing? Victoria repeated incredulously. Yes. Your perfectly tailored clothes and your penthouse apartment and your massive success. The way you fix everything and manage everything. Jason says you make everyone else feel inadequate, and he doesn't want that energy at our wedding. Rebecca's voice had risen. He wants me to shine on my wedding day, not be the second brightest person in the room next to you. Victoria felt as though she'd been slapped. And you agree with this assessment? Rebecca hesitated just long enough for Victoria to have her answer. I love Jason, Rebecca said finally. And I need to prioritize his comfort and our future together. Over 15 years of friendship. It's not like that. It's exactly like that. Victoria stood up, gathering the wedding planning binder from the table. She handed it to Rebecca, her movements precise and controlled despite the trembling she felt inside. Here. Give this to Margot. I'm sure she'll find it helpful. Vic, please try to understand. I understand perfectly. Victoria walked to the door and opened it. I understand that I've spent 15 years investing in a friendship that you're willing to discard because your fiancé feels insecure. I understand that my success, which you've always claimed to celebrate, is apparently now a liability. And I understand that I've wasted 8 months planning a wedding I'm not good enough to attend. Rebecca clutched the binder to her chest, tears forming in her eyes. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Am I? How easy should it be to throw away a decade and a half of friendship? Should I just smile and say, no problem, to being deemed too intimidating to attend your wedding? I was hoping you'd be more understanding. Rebecca's tone had an edge of accusation. Victoria laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. And I was hoping my best friend would value our friendship enough to stand up for me. I guess we're both disappointed today. Victoria felt something shift within her at these words, not forgiveness exactly, but a recognition that the pain she had experienced had created ripples far beyond her initial intent. Her extreme response to rejection had apparently catalyzed genuine self-reflection in both Rebecca and Jason. I'm glad she found value in the experience, Victoria said finally. Though I imagine there might have been less dramatic ways to learn that particular lesson. Jason laughed, the sound surprisingly genuine. Perhaps. But would either of us have truly learned it without the drama? I wouldn't have confronted my own insecurities without having them so spectacularly exposed. And honestly, would this incredible space exist if you hadn't channeled your hurt into creating something revolutionary? The question hung between them, unexpectedly insightful. Before Victoria could formulate a response, Anthony approached, apologetically interrupting. Ms. Winters, the Goldman Sachs team is requesting your presence for the formal announcement. Of course. Victoria turned back to Jason. If you'll excuse me, duty calls. He nodded. Of course. And Victoria, thank you for the conversation. I know it wasn't one you expected or perhaps wanted to have tonight. As Victoria moved away to join the Goldman Sachs executives, she found herself processing Jason's words. He was right. Would the apex exist if she hadn't first purchased the Elysian as an act of revenge? Would she have ventured into this new business direction without the catalyst of personal betrayal? The formal announcement went smoothly, with the Goldman Sachs CEO publicly committing to hosting their executive retreats exclusively at the Apex for the next 3 years, a contract worth millions and, more importantly, a prestigious endorsement that would attract similar clients. Victoria accepted the commitment with gracious professionalism, her speech highlighting the collaborative vision that had created this unique space. As the evening progressed toward midnight, Victoria found herself back on the edge of the rooftop terrace, taking a moment alone amid the success of the launch. The city sprawled before her, a tapestry of lights and possibilities, much like the new path she had created for herself. Quite a view, a familiar voice observed. Victoria turned to find Hannah joining her at the railing. It is worth every penny of the renovation budget. I saw you talking with Jason earlier, Hannah noted. That looked surprisingly civil. It was, Victoria admitted. He apologized, actually. Said his insecurity about my success was what prompted him to exclude me from the wedding. Hannah raised an eyebrow. Well, that's growth, I suppose. Though it might have been more useful before you spent millions buying a hotel to spite him. Victoria laughed, the sound carrying across the terrace. True. Though as he pointed out, would the apex exist if I hadn't? Ah, the revenge as creative catalyst theory. Hannah grinned. I like it. Very on brand for you to transform pettiness into innovation. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city below. You know, Hannah said finally, 6 months ago when you told me you'd bought the Elysian, I thought you'd lost your mind. It seemed like the most extreme overreaction possible to being uninvited from a wedding. It was extreme, Victoria acknowledged. I won't pretend it wasn't. But that's just it, Hannah continued. In a world where women are constantly told to make themselves smaller, to accommodate, to not rock the boat, you went and bought the entire ocean. She gestured to the successful event unfolding around them. And look what came of it. Not just revenge, but a whole new business vertical, a revolutionary concept in corporate hospitality, and about 50 very impressed CEOs who will never underestimate you again. Victoria considered this perspective. So you're saying the moral of the story is, extreme overreaction leads to success? Hannah laughed. No, the moral is that when someone tries to make you feel too much, too successful, too intimidating, too powerful, sometimes the answer isn't to make yourself smaller. Sometimes it's to become even bigger, to expand until they have no choice but to acknowledge your worth. The insight resonated with Victoria in unexpected ways. She had indeed refused to diminish herself to accommodate Jason's insecurity or Rebecca's weakness. Instead, she had amplified her success, her vision, her determination, transforming a petty act of revenge into a genuine achievement that would outlast the hurt that had inspired it. Ms. Winters? Anthony approached once more. The journalist from Forbes is hoping for a few minutes of your time. She's working on a feature about women disrupting traditional industries. Victoria nodded. Of course. I'll be right there. As Anthony moved away, Hannah gave Victoria's arm a squeeze. Go disrupt traditional industries. I'll hold down the fort here and continue enjoying your revenge-turned-empire. Victoria made her way through the crowd, stopping briefly to check her reflection in one of the glass panels. The woman looking back at her exuded confidence, power, and a certain hard-won wisdom. 6 months ago, she had been fueled by hurt and anger, determined to prove her worth to people who had dismissed her. Tonight, she stood at the center of her own creation, a space that embodied her vision and values, that would establish her as a pioneer in her industry. The Forbes journalist was waiting in a quiet corner of the rooftop, recorder ready. Ms. Winters, thank you for making time tonight. I'd love to hear about the inspiration behind the Apex. What made you decide to pivot from event planning to creating this entirely new concept in corporate hospitality? Victoria considered the question, thinking about the true origins of the Apex, the hurt, the rejection, the dark satisfaction of her initial revenge. Then she thought about what the Apex had become, something far greater than its origins. Something that would define her legacy in ways she hadn't initially imagined. The best innovations often come from identifying gaps in existing models, Victoria began, her voice confident and measured. I've spent my career creating exceptional experiences for clients, and I recognized that the corporate retreat space was desperately in need of reimagining. The apex represents my vision for what business gatherings can and should be, environments that inspire genuine connection and creativity rather than merely providing a functional space for meetings. It wasn't the whole truth, of course. But perhaps it was the truth that mattered now, the truth of what the apex had become rather than how it had begun. As the interview continued, Victoria articulated her vision with the clarity and confidence that had become her trademark. The Forbes journalist was visibly impressed, taking extensive notes and requesting a follow-up conversation for a potential cover story on women transforming traditional industries. By the time the gala concluded in the early hours of the morning, the Apex had secured commitments from 12 major corporations for upcoming retreats and conferences. The launch was, by any measure, an unqualified success. Victoria was one of the last to leave, taking a final walk through the transformed spaces after the guests had departed. She paused in what had once been the grand ballroom where Rebecca and Jason's wedding would have taken place. Now it was an innovative conference center with modular spaces that could be configured to suit any corporate need. The revenge that had initiated this journey was now just a footnote in a much larger story. What had begun as an act of spite had evolved into perhaps the most significant achievement of Victoria's career, not because it had proven her power to those who had underestimated her, but because it had revealed capabilities within herself she might never have discovered otherwise. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text message. Expecting it to be Hannah or Anthony with some final thought about the evening, she was surprised to see Rebecca's name on the screen. Congratulations on the opening of the Apex. Jason just came home and can't stop talking about how revolutionary it is. You've created something extraordinary from what began as pain. That's a rare gift. I hope someday you'll consider showing me what you've built. Either way, I remain in awe of your refusal to be diminished. Victoria read the message twice, a complex mix of emotions flowing through her. There was no hint of manipulation or ulterior motive in Rebecca's words, just a genuine acknowledgement of what Victoria had accomplished. Victoria nodded, unsure how to respond to this unexpected vulnerability. She talks about you, you know, Jason added. Not with anger or resentment, but with a kind of rueful admiration. She says you taught her the most important lesson of her life, that accommodating someone else's insecurity is never worth sacrificing your own authenticity. Victoria felt something shift within her at these words, not forgiveness exactly, but a recognition that the pain she had experienced had created ripples far beyond her initial intent. Her extreme response to rejection had apparently catalyzed genuine self-reflection in both Rebecca and Jason. I'm glad she found value in the experience, Victoria said finally. Though I imagine there might have been less dramatic ways to learn that particular lesson. Jason laughed, the sound surprisingly genuine. Perhaps. But would either of us have truly learned it without the drama? I wouldn't have confronted my own insecurities without having them so spectacularly exposed. And honestly, would this incredible space exist if you hadn't channeled your hurt into creating something revolutionary? The question hung between them, unexpectedly insightful. Before Victoria could formulate a response, Anthony approached, apologetically interrupting. Ms. Winters, the Goldman Sachs team is requesting your presence for the formal announcement. Of course. Victoria turned back to Jason. If you'll excuse me, duty calls. He nodded. Of course. And Victoria, thank you for the conversation. I know it wasn't one you expected or perhaps wanted to have tonight. As Victoria moved away to join the Goldman Sachs executives, she found herself processing Jason's words. He was right. Would the Apex exist if she hadn't first purchased the Elysian as an act of revenge? Would she have ventured into this new business direction without the catalyst of personal betrayal? The formal announcement went smoothly, with the Goldman Sachs CEO publicly committing to hosting their executive retreats exclusively at the Apex for the next 3 years, a contract worth millions and, more importantly, a prestigious endorsement that would attract similar clients. Victoria accepted the commitment with gracious professionalism, her speech highlighting the collaborative vision that had created this unique space. As the evening progressed toward midnight, Victoria found herself back on the edge of the rooftop terrace, taking a moment alone amid the success of the launch. The city sprawled before her, a tapestry of lights and possibilities, much like the new path she had created for herself. Quite a view, a familiar voice observed. Victoria turned to find Hannah joining her at the railing. It is worth every penny of the renovation budget. I saw you talking with Jason earlier, Hannah noted. That looked surprisingly civil. It was, Victoria admitted. He apologized, actually. Said his insecurity about my success was what prompted him to exclude me from the wedding. Hannah raised an eyebrow. Well, that's growth I suppose. Though it might have been more useful before you spent millions buying a hotel to spite him. Victoria laughed, the sound carrying across the terrace. True. Though as he pointed out, would the apex exist if I hadn't? Ah, the revenge as creative catalyst theory. Hannah grinned. I like it. Very on brand for you to transform pettiness into innovation. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city below. You know, Hannah said finally, 6 months ago when you told me you'd bought the Elysian, I thought you'd lost your mind. It seemed like the most extreme overreaction possible to being uninvited from a wedding. It was extreme, Victoria acknowledged. I won't pretend it wasn't. But that's just it, Hannah continued. In a world where women are constantly told to make themselves smaller, to accommodate, to not rock the boat, you went and bought the entire ocean. She gestured to the successful event unfolding around them. And look what came of it. Not just revenge, but a whole new business vertical, a revolutionary concept in corporate hospitality, and about 50 very impressed CEOs who will never underestimate you again. Victoria considered this perspective. So you're saying the moral of the story is, extreme overreaction leads to success? Hannah laughed. No, the moral is that when someone tries to make you feel too much, too successful, too intimidating, too powerful, sometimes the answer isn't to make yourself smaller. Sometimes it's to become even bigger, to expand until they have no choice but to acknowledge your worth. The insight resonated with Victoria in unexpected ways. She had indeed refused to diminish herself to accommodate Jason's insecurity or Rebecca's weakness. Instead, she had amplified her success, her vision, her determination, transforming a petty act of revenge into a genuine achievement that would outlast the hurt that had inspired it. Ms. Winters? Anthony approached once more. The journalist from Forbes is hoping for a few minutes of your time. She's working on a feature about women disrupting traditional industries. Victoria nodded. Of course. I'll be right there. As Anthony moved away, Hannah gave Victoria's arm a squeeze. Go disrupt traditional industries. I'll hold down the fort here and continue enjoying your revenge-turned empire. Victoria made her way through the crowd, stopping briefly to check her reflection in one of the glass panels. The woman looking back at her exuded confidence, power, and a certain hard-won wisdom. 6 months ago, she had been fueled by hurt and anger, determined to prove her worth to people who had dismissed her. Tonight, she stood at the center of her own creation, a space that embodied her vision and values, that would establish her as a pioneer in her industry. The Forbes journalist was waiting in a quiet corner of the rooftop, recorder ready. Ms. Winters, thank you for making time tonight. I'd love to hear about the inspiration behind the Apex. What made you decide to pivot from event planning to creating this entirely new concept in corporate hospitality? Victoria considered the question, thinking about the true origins of the Apex, the hurt, the rejection, the dark satisfaction of her initial revenge. Then she thought about what the Apex had become, something far greater than its origins. Something that would define her legacy in ways she hadn't initially imagined. The best innovations often come from identifying gaps in existing models, Victoria began, her voice confident and measured. I've spent my career creating exceptional experiences for clients, and I recognize that the corporate retreat space was desperately in need of reimagining. The Apex represents my vision for what business gatherings can and should be, environments that inspire genuine connection and creativity rather than merely providing a functional space for meetings. It wasn't the whole truth, of course. But perhaps it was the truth that mattered now, the truth of what the Apex had become rather than how it had begun. As the interview continued, Victoria articulated her vision with the clarity and confidence that had become her trademark. The Forbes journalist was visibly impressed, taking extensive notes and requesting a follow-up conversation for a potential cover story on women transforming traditional industries. By the time the gala concluded in the early hours of the morning, the Apex had secured commitments from 12 major corporations for upcoming retreats and conferences. The launch was, by any measure, an unqualified success. Victoria was one of the last to leave, taking a final walk through the transformed spaces after the guests had departed. She paused in what had once been the grand ballroom where Rebecca and Jason's wedding would have taken place. Now it was an innovative conference center with modular spaces that could be configured to suit any corporate need. The revenge that had initiated this journey was now just a footnote in a much larger story. What had begun as an act of spite had evolved into perhaps the most significant achievement of Victoria's career, not because it had proven her power to those who had underestimated her, but because it had revealed capabilities within herself she might never have discovered otherwise. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text message. Expecting it to be Hannah or Anthony with some final thought about the evening, she was surprised to see Rebecca's name on the screen. Congratulations on the opening of the Apex. Jason just came home and can't stop talking about how revolutionary it is. You've created something extraordinary from what began as pain. That's a rare gift. I hope someday you'll consider showing me what you've built. Either way, I remain in awe of your refusal to be diminished. Victoria read the message twice, a complex mix of emotions flowing through her. There was no hint of manipulation or ulterior motive in Rebecca's words, just a genuine acknowledgement of what Victoria had accomplished. After a moment's consideration, Victoria typed a simple response: "The Apex is open for tours every Tuesday at 10 a.m. If you're interested in seeing what determination can create, you're welcome to attend." It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation. It wasn't a return to the friendship they had once shared. But it was an opening, a recognition that sometimes the most powerful response to being underestimated is not to prove others wrong, but to prove yourself right in ways that transform not just your own life, but entire industries. Victoria slipped her phone back into her evening bag and made her way to the private elevator. As the doors closed behind her, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the polished metal, confident, powerful, undiminished. The woman who had once bought a hotel to close a wedding venue out of spite had created something far more valuable than revenge, a legacy that would outlast any personal slight, a success that couldn't be dismissed or diminished, a version of herself that refused to be anything less than extraordinary. As the elevator descended, Victoria smiled to herself. Sometimes the best revenge wasn't just living well, it was living magnificently, expansively, unapologetically. It was transforming hurt into vision, rejection into innovation, and limitations into launching points for unprecedented success. The doors opened to the quiet lobby, where her driver was waiting to take her home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chapters in the story she was writing for herself. And whatever came next, Victoria Winters would face it exactly as she was: too successful, too confident, too powerful to be anything but herself. The renovation had been extensive, ambitious, and completed in record time. The wedding venues and ballrooms had been reimagined as state-of-the-art conference facilities. The guest rooms had been redesigned with the business traveler in mind. Luxurious but functional, with dedicated workspaces and the latest technology. The restaurant had been transformed into a culinary destination that emphasized local, sustainable ingredients and private dining options for corporate clients. But it was the rooftop, previously an underutilized space with basic landscaping, that had become the crown jewel of Victoria's vision. She had transformed it into a breathtaking garden terrace with panoramic views of the city, complete with fire pits, comfortable seating areas, and a glass-enclosed pavilion for year-round use. It was designed as a space where executives could step away from formal meetings to find inspiration, where teams could connect in a setting that encouraged genuine conversation rather than corporate posturing. "Ms. Winters?" Anthony Pierce approached, clipboard in hand. "The first guests will be arriving soon. Is there anything else you'd like to review before we open the doors?" Victoria turned, taking in the transformation of her hotel manager. Over the past 6 months, Anthony had embraced the vision for the Apex with unexpected enthusiasm, evolving from a traditional hotelier into an innovative hospitality leader. He had taken ownership of the project in ways Victoria hadn't anticipated, offering insights and refinements that had significantly enhanced the final result. "I think we're ready, Anthony," she replied with a smile. "Your team has done exceptional work. I couldn't have asked for better execution of this vision." He nodded, professional pride evident in his posture. "It's been the most challenging and rewarding project of my career. When you first announced the transition, I'll admit I had my doubts. But seeing it come together like this," he gestured to the space around them, "it's revolutionary. I believe we've created something truly unique in the market." "We have," Victoria agreed. "Now we just need to make sure tonight's guests recognize that uniqueness. The Apex needs to be more than just another luxury hotel, it needs to be an experience that transforms how companies think about corporate gatherings." Tonight's guest list included CEOs and executives from 50 of the country's top companies, along with influential business journalists, thought leaders in corporate culture, and a carefully curated group of potential clients. The success of the Apex would be determined not just by the physical transformation of the space, but by how effectively it positioned itself in the market as an essential destination for companies seeking to elevate their corporate events. Victoria glanced at her watch, a new acquisition, a Patek Philippe that had been a gift to herself when the renovation had come in under budget and ahead of schedule. "I should go change for the event. The team from Goldman Sachs will be arriving early for a private tour. Of course. I'll make sure everything is perfect." Anthony moved away to continue his preparations, leaving Victoria alone with the skyline view for one more moment. She touched the silver charm bracelet on her wrist. She had continued wearing it since Rebecca's visit 6 months ago, not as a reminder of their fractured friendship, but as a symbol of her own journey and the promise she had kept to herself. The bracelet had become a talisman of sorts, a physical reminder that the path to success wasn't always straight or simple, but the destination could be more magnificent than originally imagined. Her phone buzzed with a text from Hannah. On my way. Can't wait to see the final transformation of your revenge hotel into a legitimate business empire. You're an actual legend. Victoria smiled, tucking her phone away. Hannah had been her most steadfast supporter throughout the entire process, offering both encouragement and the occasional reality check when Victoria's perfectionism threatened to overwhelm the project. She had never once questioned the unusual origins of the acquisition, simply accepting it as another example of Victoria's unwillingness to be diminished by others' expectations. 45 minutes later, Victoria emerged from the private elevator in a midnight blue gown that complemented the Apex's new color scheme. She had chosen her attire carefully, elegant without being ostentatious, confident without being intimidating. Tonight wasn't about Victoria Winters the individual, it was about the Apex as an extension of her vision for corporate hospitality. The first guests were already arriving, greeted by staff positioned throughout the lobby. Victoria moved among them with practiced ease, welcoming CEOs and industry leaders, guiding conversations toward the Apex's unique approach to business gatherings. She had perfected the art of presence, commanding attention without dominating it, ensuring she was memorable without overshadowing the environment she had created. Victoria. Hannah appeared at her elbow, resplendent in emerald green. This place is incredible. I mean, I saw the renderings, but the reality is something else entirely. Thank you, Victoria replied, genuine pleasure warming her voice. It came together exactly as I'd hoped. Hannah lowered her voice. I just overheard the CEO of Mercer Industries telling his CFO that this place makes their usual conference venues look like outdated relics. You've hit a nerve with this concept. Victoria nodded, satisfaction flowing through her. That's precisely the response I was aiming for. Corporate retreats have been stuck in the same model for decades, either sterile conference centers or resorts that feel more like forced vacations than productive business environments. The Apex is designed to be the perfect balance, luxurious but purposeful, impressive but functional. Well, you've nailed it, Hannah confirmed. Oh, and heads up, I just saw Jason Chen arrive with his architectural firm's delegation. Apparently Sutton and Partners is on the vendor list for Blackstone Group, and they're all here together. Victoria's composure didn't waver, though the information was unexpected. Interesting. I didn't realize Jason's firm had Blackstone as a client. Want me to run interference? Hannah offered. Not necessary, Victoria assured her. This is a business event. We're all professionals here. As the evening progressed, Victoria skillfully navigated the gathering, engaging with key clients and potential partners. The response to the Apex was overwhelmingly positive, with several companies requesting information about booking the space for upcoming events. The journalists in attendance were visibly impressed, taking extensive notes and photographs for features already in development. Victoria was in conversation with the CEO of a major tech company when she felt a presence at her elbow. Turning slightly, she found herself face to face with Jason Chen for the first time since their phone conversation 6 months earlier. Ms. Winters, he greeted her, his tone professionally cordial. Congratulations on the opening. The transformation is remarkable. Victoria maintained her composure, though she noted with interest that Jason appeared uncomfortable. Thank you, Mr. Chen. I appreciate that coming from someone with your architectural background. An awkward silence followed, broken when the tech CEO excused himself to speak with another guest. Victoria and Jason were left momentarily alone amid the crowded rooftop. I didn't realize your firm would be attending tonight, Victoria noted, keeping her tone neutral. Jason nodded. We're here with Blackstone. They're considering a major development project, and we're one of the firms in contention for the design work. I see. Well, I hope the Apex impresses them appropriately. Victoria took a sip of champagne, studying Jason over the rim of her glass. He looked different somehow, less confident, perhaps, or simply more authentic. Victoria, he began, then paused, seemingly searching for the right words. I owe you an apology. Of all the possible openings, this was perhaps the last one Victoria had expected. An apology? Yes. Jason met her gaze directly. What I did, asking Rebecca to exclude you from our wedding because I felt threatened by your success, it was small-minded and insecure. I've had a lot of time to reflect on that decision over the past months. Victoria maintained her composure, though the straightforward admission caught her off guard. That's surprisingly self-aware, Mr. Chen. Jason, please. He glanced around at the stunning rooftop venue. It's hard to maintain pretenses when standing in the middle of such tangible evidence of what happens when someone refuses to be diminished. Victoria allowed herself a small smile. I suppose the apex does make rather a definitive statement. Rebecca was right about you all along, Jason continued. She always said you were the most formidable person she knew, that when you set your mind to something, nothing could stand in your way. I should have seen that as something to admire rather than something to fear. The mention of Rebecca caused Victoria to tense slightly. How is Rebecca? She's well, Jason replied. We're taking things slowly. Reassessing our relationship. And what we both want from it. The wedding is still indefinitely postponed. Victoria nodded, unsure how to respond to this unexpected vulnerability. She talks about you, you know, Jason added. Not with anger or resentment, but with a kind of rueful admiration. She says you taught her the most important lesson of her life, that accommodating someone else's insecurity is never worth sacrificing your own authenticity. Rebecca moved toward the door, pausing in the threshold. I hope someday you'll understand. Maybe once you're in a serious relationship yourself, you'll see how important it is to support your partner's needs. The implication that Victoria's single status somehow made her incapable of understanding relationship dynamics was the final straw. She straightened to her full height, her voice perfectly level as she delivered her parting words. Goodbye, Rebecca. I hope your perfect day is everything you've sacrificed for. The door closed with a soft click that belied the finality of the moment. Victoria stood motionless in her foyer, the events of the last 15 minutes replaying in her mind like a surreal film. Her phone pinged with an Instagram notification, a friend commenting on Rebecca's most recent post. Almost automatically, Victoria opened the app. There on her screen was a photo of Rebecca, Jason, and their newly hired wedding planner Margot Chen, all smiling at what appeared to be a cake tasting. The caption read, "Final wedding details coming together perfectly. With at Margot Chen events. 96 days until I marry my perfect man. Hashtag Winter Wonderland. Hashtag The Elysian Hotel. The Elysian Hotel." One of the venues Victoria had meticulously researched and presented to Rebecca months ago. The one Rebecca had claimed was too pretentious for her taste. Something cold and hard crystallized in Victoria's chest. For 15 years, she had been the supportive friend, the reliable shoulder, the problem solver. She had built her career on making impossible things happen, on turning challenges into opportunities. And now, she had just been discarded like an outdated accessory that no longer matched the outfit. Too intimidating, she whispered to her empty apartment. The words echoed in the space that had hosted countless movie nights, birthday celebrations, and heart-to-heart conversations with the woman who had just walked out of her life. Victoria moved to her bar cart and poured herself 2 fingers of the expensive scotch she reserved for special occasions. This, she decided, qualified. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out at the city sprawled before her. A city she had conquered through sheer determination and relentless work. Her phone buzzed with texts from their mutual friends. Word was already spreading. Is it true? Rebecca said you dropped out of the wedding? OMG, what happened? With you and Becca? Heard you're not going to the wedding anymore. Drama? The narrative was already being rewritten. In Rebecca's version, Victoria had apparently chosen to step away. The betrayal was being compounded by lies. Victoria drained her glass, the expensive liquor burning a path down her throat. She thought about the appropriate response, the measured, mature path of acceptance and moving on that any self-help book would recommend. Then she thought about how Rebecca and Jason had made her feel inadequate, unwanted, threatening simply because of her success. She thought about the 8 months of evenings and weekends she'd devoted to creating Rebecca's perfect day. She thought about the casual cruelty of being excluded from an event she had poured her heart into planning. Victoria set down her empty glass and picked up her phone. Not to respond to the barrage of texts, but to open her banking app. As one of the city's premier event planners, Victoria had connections throughout New York's hospitality industry. She also had resources, considerable resources, that she had accumulated through years of strategic investing and professional success. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she was looking for, Maxwell Grant, the real estate developer who owned several properties throughout the city, including, if she remembered correctly, a significant stake in the Elysian Hotel. Victoria had orchestrated the launch gala for his most recent luxury development. He'd been more than pleased with the results, and with the high-profile clients she'd introduced him to that evening. It was time to call in a favor. The phone rang 3 times before Maxwell's assistant answered. Mr. Grant's office. This is Victoria Winters. I need to speak with Max about a potential investment opportunity. It's time-sensitive. 2 minutes later, Maxwell's familiar baritone came through the line. Victoria. To what do I owe the pleasure? Please tell me you're planning another event that will make me look good in front of the mayor. Victoria smiled, her voice transforming into the confident, charismatic tone that had helped her build her empire. Actually, Max, I'm calling about the Elysian. I understand your group holds a controlling interest. That's right. Beautiful property. Why do you ask? Victoria took a deep breath, the plan crystallizing in her mind with each passing second. I'm interested in making an offer. There was a moment of silence on the line. For an event? No. For the hotel itself. Another pause. Victoria, the Elysian is valued at, I know exactly what it's valued at, she interrupted smoothly. And I'm prepared to offer 15% above that valuation for a quick, quiet deal. All cash. The silence that followed was longer this time. Victoria could almost see Maxwell leaning back in his chair, trying to determine if she was serious. That's an extremely generous offer, he said finally. But may I ask why the sudden interest in hotel ownership? And why the Elysian specifically? Victoria looked out at the park, watching as the afternoon sunlight painted the trees in golden hues. Let's just say I'm diversifying my investments. And the Elysian has sentimental value. I see. Maxwell's tone suggested he didn't see it all but was too intrigued to press. Well, I'd need to discuss this with my partners, but with an offer that substantial, I think we could move rather quickly. How quickly? Given the premium you're offering? We could potentially close within 30 days if you're serious. Victoria checked the date on her watch. 30 days would put them at early November. Rebecca's wedding was scheduled for January 10th, just over 3 months away. Perfect, she said. Have your lawyer draft the paperwork. I'll have my team review it immediately. After ending the call, Victoria stood motionless, processing the magnitude of what she had just set in motion. The logical part of her brain screamed that this was an extreme overreaction, that purchasing an entire hotel to spite a former friend was the definition of madness. But another part, the part that had been labeled too intimidating, the part that had been dismissed and discarded after years of loyalty, felt a cold satisfaction. Rebecca and Jason wanted their perfect day at the Elysian? They wanted a wedding free from Victoria's intimidating presence? Well, she would give them exactly half of what they wanted. There would indeed be no Victoria Winters at their Elysian Hotel wedding. Because there would be no Elysian Hotel wedding at all. The 3 days following Rebecca's visit passed in a blur of activity. Victoria cancelled appointments, rearranged her schedule, and assembled a team of financial advisors, real estate attorneys, and business consultants. To her team's credit, not one person questioned why their boss was suddenly intent on purchasing a luxury hotel at a premium price with unprecedented speed. On the 4th day, Victoria's phone lit up with Rebecca's name. She stared at it for several rings before finally answering. Hello, Rebecca. Vic, Rebecca's voice sounded small. I've been thinking about our conversation, and I feel terrible about how things ended. Victoria said nothing, waiting. Jason and I talked more, and we both feel awful. We'd like to have dinner with you, to explain better and hopefully find a way forward that works for everyone. Victoria ran her finger along the edge of her desk, considering her response. I appreciate the gesture, but I'm afraid my schedule is completely full for the foreseeable future. I'm in the middle of a major business acquisition. Oh? Rebecca sounded disappointed. Well, maybe when things calm down? We really do value your friendship, Vic. The wedding planning just got complicated. Yes, I imagine uninviting your best friend of 15 years does complicate things. Victoria kept her tone pleasant. How are the new arrangements coming along? Is the Elysian everything you hoped for? It's beautiful, Rebecca admitted, a note of enthusiasm creeping into her voice despite the awkwardness. Margot says it's the most sought-after winter wedding venue in the city. We're so lucky they had a cancellation for our date. Indeed. Very fortunate. Victoria glanced at the preliminary purchase agreement sitting on her desk, waiting for her signature. Well, I should let you go. Best of luck with the continued planning. Vic, wait, but Victoria had already ended the call. She picked up the agreement, reviewing the terms one final time. The purchase price was staggering, far more than she had ever planned to spend on a single investment, but her financial team had confirmed she could manage it without jeopardizing her other assets. Her event planning business was thriving, and her previous investments had performed exceptionally well. Victoria signed her name with a flourish, then called her assistant to have the documents couriered to Maxwell Grant's office immediately. 28 days later, Victoria sat in the opulent lobby of the Elysian Hotel, waiting for the meeting that would finalize her ownership. Maxwell Grant arrived precisely on time, accompanied by his legal team and the hotel's current general manager. Victoria, Maxwell greeted her with a handshake. And that, she had finally learned, was not too much at all. It was exactly enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.